So joining us is AJ Shannon, assistant editor at Vault Comics. Welcome to the show, AJ.
Thanks for having me. This is so much fun. I love the show. So it's great to have been invited. I'm having a great time. It was
Awesome.
awesome.
We appreciate you coming on tonight for sure.
Yes, absolute pleasure. So Vault Comics, I know people are more familiar with DC and Marvel. So can you tell us a little bit about Vault Comics and who are their like primary heroes and villains?
So Vault Comics mainly specializes in sci-fi, fantasy, and horror comics. That's what we're kind of known for. We have a lot of really popular titles. Right now, one of our most popular is this book called Barbaric that just finished its 5th volume. And that book actually, we just had an announcement that Netflix is going to be picking it up as a live action adaptation TV show. So
Wow.
that's really exciting. And we also have a graphic novel adaptation of the really popular book Dungeon Crawler Carl coming out very soon. I believe that's maybe this week or next week. So that's very, very exciting. So we do a lot of kind of, some original stuff where we specialize in a lot of like cool adaptation work. We also work with a lot of celebrities, which is really exciting and cool. Yeah, we have a lot of really cool different stuff kind of going on.
Cool. So can you tell us, a little bit about some of the more notable names that you've worked with, and what was that experience like?
So one person that we worked with that's been really cool was Pete Wentz from Fall Out Boy. We did a book with him called Dying Inside, which is a really, really
Really?
cool book.
Wow.
Yeah.
I used to be
Um,
super into them. Fall Out Boy.
Yeah, so that was really cool. We also have Patton Oswalt. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. He's a really famous comedian. He works with us working on this book called Money Shot that we've done. We're on the sixth arc of that right now. So he's kind of like a co-writer in that. He's a comedian. He's very cool. Yeah.
Awesome. So, like prior to coming to Vault, you were at Marvel, and
hmm
with you being at Vault, do you feel like there's a little more creative freedom, especially since maybe the company is not as well known?
Yeah, definitely. It also is a much smaller company. So something that I definitely noticed at Marvel is there's a lot more kind of hoops to jump through if you want to try something new and interesting since Marvel is owned by Disney. So a lot of stuff has to, be
Ah,
under Disney's jurisdiction. Whereas Vault, like I report directly to our editor in chief. Whereas at Marvel, there was kind of a lot more like of those, steps that you have to take to try new things.
yeah. Can imagine that. I mean, did you enjoy
Yeah.
your time at Marvel or what was that like?
I enjoyed it a lot. The people there are incredible. Some of the most like talented, hardworking, intelligent people. It was really nice. It's just definitely a different vibe than Vault because it's a much bigger company. There's a lot more people you're working with. It's a much more like complex ecosystem. So it's definitely very different. Whereas at Vault, I work with maybe like 10 to 15 people total. And we're all just kind of like a big
Wow.
happy family there. So it's definitely a very different
Yeah,
vibe,
that
but really
sounds
enjoyable experiences.
it sounds a lot different
It's
than
very different.
Marvel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, while you were at Marvel, what were some of the things that you were working on?
So I was an intern, so I mostly did kind of the work of like what an editorial assistant would do. I did a lot of, print review and like grammar checking and, gathering reference for artists to draw some of like our, very popular characters. That's one of the big differences I noticed a lot too over at Marvel because we have so many super fans. So there's a lot of like worrying about like very small things like, oh god, is this like super fan of this one character on Reddit gonna get mad that we screwed up the eye color of this character on one panel in one issue? Like that's something that they really care about over there.
Oh,
Whereas
wow.
obviously at Vault that stuff is important, but it's like not, it's not nearly the same like caliber of like super fans.
I mean, you probably got like millions of, people scrutinizing every single thing at Marvel
Yeah.
because people are really, invested in that ecosystem. It's so large, there's so many people. So one mistake, like you mentioned, it could cause a
Exactly. Yeah.
ruckus. So like to me it sounds like Vault more so has like more that startup feel, whereas Marvel was, more the typical big corporation, whereas more rigid structure. Um so like yeah, did it take long to adjust to Vault once you went over there to adjust to more of that free flowing like nature?
Yeah, I would definitely say that. I think the biggest difference is just like what they prioritize, I guess, as a company. Like Marvel definitely prioritizes like keeping that kind of magic alive that's been there for so long, whereas Vault is so new. Vault has only been around for about 10 years, whereas Marvel, has been around for years and years and years and
Long
years.
time. Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely a lot more of like trying all this new interesting stuff and seeing what sticks. Whereas Marvel, it's a lot more there's a much bigger emphasis on like keeping the fans that we already have and keeping everyone entertained and interested.
Mm.
Well, that must be really cool, like being the one to kind of establish some of these like new series, and if it really takes off, you're going to be the one that had a major role in creating these new characters, these new worlds. So that's got to be a tremendous feeling.
Exactly. Yeah. You described it very well.
So yeah, like as an assistant editor, can you tell us like what exactly do assistant editors do? Like what are some of your current roles?
I would say it's about a 50-50 of interacting with talent and kind of like creating a really good creative team for certain projects, as well as kind of like facilitating the collaboration process between people. Because there's so many people who go into creating comics. It's almost similar to like when you go to the movies and you sit. I mean, maybe you're going to a Marvel movie, so you sit through all of the trailers and the credits and everything, the whole movie, and you see every single name. You're like, wow, there's so many people that go into this.
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes when you're reading like a novel, it's like, oh, it's just the author's name, and that's kind of it. But with comics, you have, you might have multiple writers, multiple artists, you have cover artists, you have letterers, you have editors, you have so many people that go into making this like one book. So so there can be issues there can be miscommunications. We work with a lot of people as well who English is not their first language. So that also is a very interesting process where we kind of have to, as editors, facilitate the collaboration process to make sure things run smoothly, to make sure there's no miscommunication, to make sure things are getting in on time. So a lot of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it's as simple as, checking grammar and checking for like continuity errors in art, and other times it's like I'm sending out like 100 emails to try and get an artist staffed for a book.
And you mentioned there's some people from different countries that you're
Yeah,
working with. Which countries?
we work with a lot of people from Italy, also like Brazil. It kind of depends, but there are sometimes, I mean, this isn't not English, but like there's also a lot of artists from Canada that we've worked with.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of people who speak a lot of different languages, so that also is really cool.
So like aside from the USA, what are you mentioned Italy, but what are some of the countries that have really like latched on to Vault Comics that you're aware of?
No, that's not about comics. I'm not totally sure, honestly, about our sales in other countries. But since we're a newer company, a lot of the comics that, the comic stores that carry our comics are US based. I think we might have some stuff in Canada, but I don't know that we are well known enough in other countries besides like those artists that we work with and stuff like that.
Okay.
I'm not totally sure, but I would have to ask. But
Okay. So out of the Vault Comics franchise, which are some of your favorites, and why is that?
oh, we are doing this book right now. It's a second arc of this book called Lilith, which is really, really fun. It is sort of like a fantasy YA romance situation about a demon named Lilith who gets banished from hell, and she's trying to find a way back, but she lost some of her memories about how she's there. She meets a character named Penelope, who's this like kind of like naive like librarian type who's like happens to be studying this book that can like help Lilith get back home. And there's a lot of like hijinks that ensue. There's other demons and stuff that show up, and they have to do all this stuff without the humans finding out that they're demons. So it's a lot of fun. The art is really fun. This amazing artist and writer named Corinne Howell we work with, and yeah, it's a great time. We're doing the second volume of that right now. So
That's awesome. How did you, for the listeners, how did you actually initially get into comics, or maybe just, maybe you had interest and then you started working in them? What did that kind of look like for you?
So growing up, I grew up with a dad who was very, very into comics and nerdy kind of stuff. I didn't grow up reading comics a ton. I was more so like the person who was always watching the Marvel movies and Star Wars and Star Trek and all these different things. And then when COVID happened and the big pandemic happened, and I was kind of just like stuck in my room for a year, I was like, I probably should actually like read the comics that these movies are based off of, because the movies are great. The comics have to be pretty good. So I started reading a lot of comics. My favorite series to this day, and one of my favorite characters, is Moon Knight, the Marvel character. I actually have a Moon Knight tattoo because I love, love Moon Knight. So that was like the big one that really got me into comics. And then ever since, I've just been like on a roll there.
So do you find like the experience you get from comics is a little more immersive compared to the movies, or do you feel like it's about the same? Because, sometimes with normal books, people say, the books, they paint a much more vivid picture. They go into more detail. So like, how do you feel comics compares to like the movie adaptations usually?
I think it really depends. I think one of the most exciting things to me about the comics and characters, especially with something like Marvel or DC, is that there's all of these different comics that are written by different writers and different artists, and they all have their own take on the same character. Whereas a lot of the time in the movies, it's like, you cast one guy, you choose one director, and like kind of the tone stays the same the whole time, or there's not a lot of different ways you can interpret the same thing. So that's one thing that I really enjoy about comics a lot. There's so many different iterations of so many different characters and teams. And, there's like differences in like writing style, art style. There's so many different ways that you can interpret the same characters and the same stories. So I feel like that is really exciting to me about comics.
Now, in terms of positions, are you happy with the position that you're at right now? Or do you feel like you want to shift to the right, to the left, up, down? Like, do you feel like you want to change ultimately, or what does that look like?
I'm pretty open. I'm a writer, so I also do some writing kind of stuff, but I really enjoy both writing and editing. I think that it's really exciting to not only create stories, but also help other people who are really passionate about something and who have a good idea about a story or a character, to kind of help them build that process up, because a lot of the time writers need an editor. They can't do it all themselves, and it's good to bounce ideas off of somebody. People actually at Vault, this isn't very common, but people at Vault, actually, a lot of them are writers as well as editors. So like my boss, Adrian Wassel, who's our editor-in-chief, is also co-writer of the book that we did with Post Malone a few years back called Big Rig, which is a really great book. So that's really exciting. And we have some other people in the staff who write as well. That's not really a huge thing at like Marvel, for example. So you might not really see that at a lot of the bigger companies, but because Vault is smaller, they can do whatever they want. We can do whatever we want. It's great. It's awesome. Lots of creative freedom there. So there's that. But I've kind of just been, over the past couple of years with my career, kind of just like throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. I actually was planning on being more of a National Geographic science writer and going more that route before I got the internship at Marvel, because I have dual degrees in geology and English. So it's definitely been very interesting and different. I never really saw myself working in comics originally. I was always just I'm a fan. I didn't really think that it would be an option, because comics is such a difficult industry to break into.
Yeah. So what does that look like? How did that happen? How did you, ultimately break in with that first role or first internship?
The whole situation was pretty crazy. I actually got the interview for Marvel the same day that I was applying for a bunch of grad schools in Germany to go get my PhD in paleontology, because I was planning on doing kind of the geology paleontology route. And I had the interview, and I was kind of just like, this is really cool, but I'm not going to get a Marvel internship. I was just like, oh, whatever. And then I got the acceptance letter, and that was really awesome. That was great. So I was like, I can't not take this. Even if this goes nowhere, it'll still be a cool experience. I didn't really, at that point, didn't know that I would even be continuing in the comics industry after that internship. I just kind of thought it'd be a cool experience. So I got, all the schools that I got into, I deferred, and I was just like, I'm going to go to this for as long as they'll let me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Awesome. Did you find your degree in geology helped you like with the world building and just in any way of crafting the world of a comic book and universe?
I would say, like, not necessarily comic books specifically, but I will say that it's been very interesting to be someone who has a degree in both the humanities and the sciences, because there aren't a lot of people like that right now. And it's helped me both in my career and also story wise, especially when I was at Marvel, because I know a lot about the inner workings of STEM. And a lot of famous, like, Marvel characters, for example, are like scientists or physicists. And there's all of these things in, especially Marvel, but also in some other like science fiction comics where you have to know like real life information about science in order to kind of tell those stories. So that's been exciting for me. And then it's also helped me with things like software and boring stuff like Excel because I had to do so much of that. And usually, like, in your English degree, they don't teach you how to use Excel. They just teach you how to use Word, and they're like, "Good luck."
So
So,
like what have you had to do inside of Excel or other databases?
do you mean like for comics or just in
Yeah,
general?
yeah, for comics.
There's a lot of like, I mean, Vault alone, we have so many comics, and organization is really, really crucial. Vault is actually a completely remote, for the most part, company. Our base is in Missoula, Montana, but only the two CEOs, Damien and Adrian, are there. The rest of our company is actually remote and spread out across the country. So much of
Nice.
our like, our meetings and like all these things rely on having a really well organized database that everyone can get what they need. So that's been like very helpful. And as an assistant editor, a lot of what I do is organizing, like files and like boring stuff. But
But do
I know how to like
you
use
do
it
you
pretty
enjoy
well.
that? You enjoy
I
that kind of
do.
stuff?
I said it in my interview. I was like, guys, I love Excel. I love color coding. And it's like one of those things where it's like you guys are gonna think that I'm like lying and just saying that, but I'm not. I spent 4 years getting a geology degree and using so many different databases and Excel and all this stuff. It's like I want to put that to good use.
Have you ever considered coding?
I tried. I'm not the best at coding. If it's like too much with
Difficult.
if it's too much with numbers, I'm not the best at it. I think that I need to be able. I'm like, I don't know, maybe I'm a little girly in that way, but I'm like, I need it to look pretty and to have some nice color coding stuff and all my pretty little files and things. Because
You'd
geology, even though it's
probably you'd probably fit more into like the front end developer,
mm,
UI developer track
yeah,
if you were to go down that lane.
yeah.
So, like when it comes to writing characters, creating a believable character, what are some of the things that people may not know that actually goes into that? Like, what level of research does it take to before you're really comfortable pushing a character out on the world?
I think it really goes a lot into talking to people that you know who have those lived experiences. I've seen a lot of the times people try and write characters who are very different from themselves, and that can go really well, but it can also go really poorly. I've received pitches before where I've had to turn them down because the person who's writing the story is just clearly someone who doesn't actually know what it's like to have a certain lived experience. So I feel like a lot of times things are underutilized when it comes to like, oh, I want to write this story about this person who has this job or who had this experience, and they don't actually reach out to real life people who've experienced those things, or maybe do some like psychological research and really get in deep with that kind of stuff.
Sure. Do y'all do like focus testing? Like, okay, we have this comic book written, but before we send it out to the world, we send it to a small batch of people and see what they think.
We haven't done that with any of our um like newer comics, but we do a lot of the time if we're doing an adaptation of something that already exists, or we're doing kind of like this comic exists within this like universe that already exists. A lot of the time we will hire a continuity reader, or like basically we just like find a super fan and we literally like are like, here's the script, tell us what we did wrong so no one gets mad at us. Because that's
Wow.
important.
Awesome. So let's just say, Vault gave you the keys to the kingdom. They say, hey, we want you to create your own series. What do you think the universe that you would set it in, kind of like the ambiance, the atmosphere? Can you describe maybe a couple of the characters, and who would you like on your team that's outside of Vault? Let's just say you could have any artist and they would hire them for you.
Oh, that's a good question. When it comes to my writing, I myself, I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, and I really value including queer stories in as much media as possible, because there is a lot of that, but also a lot of the people who write characters who are gay or lesbian or transgender, whatever, a lot of them are not that identity that they're writing. So I feel like there needs to be more of that. So my general goal is, as a writer, if I were ever to be like the sole writer of something, I want my main character at the very least to be a queer person, because there's already enough stories, I think, with straight people being the main characters. So if I'm going to be the writer and it's that I want to relate to the main character, that's what I'm going to do. But in terms of genre, I really enjoy everything. Getting the interview at Vault was really exciting because, like I said earlier, Vault's main stuff that they do is fantasy, sci-fi, and horror. And those are my 3 favorite genres. So that's really exciting. So I don't know. I would say stuff like with a lot. I really like dark fantasy, so I probably would do something very dark fantasy, very Tim Burton, 80s Jim Henson-esque for that kind of universe. Have some cool cast of characters, someone with powers, someone who's like a pirate, maybe. I don't know, just playing into like every cool like franchise or like 80s movie that I like watched when I was a kid, just like combining and shoving as many like cool tropes into there as possible.
Now, what about, okay, I mean, I grew up, and I'm sure Kevin grew up with X-Men, X-Men cards, the cartoon, the comics, are you into X-Men at all? And if so, who's your favorite character?
I mean, I do love X-Men. I love the X-Men Evolution, that cartoon. That was like, I loved that cartoon when I was younger. That was great. Gosh, favorite character. I don't know. That's hard. I really like all the X-Men a lot. I love Rogue. Rogue is so cool.
Rogue,
her powers
is
are like
cool.
the coolest.
I like Gambit. I'm a big
Gambit is
fan.
awesome.
With the cards,
Yeah, no, Gambit is awesome. Yeah.
So like let's just say Vault struck a deal with Marvel or DC, and you could pick a couple of characters to do a crossover with, the Vault comic characters. Who would you pick from, let's just say DC, and then who would you pick from Marvel?
Oh, that's cool. Okay. Like with Vault characters?
Yeah, just do like a crossover, like the universes crossover.
Oh, that would be so cool. I feel like I gotta go. I'm a huge Batman fan. Just off that was like when I went to Marvel. I actually during one of the interviews they asked me what my favorite movie was, and I panicked and I said like 89 Batman, which like is true. It's not a lie, but I was like, I probably should have picked one of my favorite Marvel movies instead of saying like a DC movie during the interview. I still got hired, so they didn't take it too personally.
It didn't matter.
Yeah, but I love like anything like with Batman and Moon Knight. I think it'd be great because I feel like they're like I'm shocked that they haven't done a crossover of that already. So there's that. I like a lot of our fantasy characters, and I like in terms of Vault, but also in terms of Marvel. So like I love Wiccan is really cool, or like Agatha. A lot of our like more witchy sort of characters, I think that those are really cool over at Marvel. And in terms of Vault, it's hard because a lot of our Vault stuff it's not the same as Marvel where everything is kind of in the same universe. At Vault, it's more like a regular publisher where like a lot of our universes are very different from each other.
Oh, wow.
So I think in particular, like different, I guess, books, like you could kind of pick and choose different Marvel or DC characters that could belong in different universes, depending on which one you're looking at.
Awesome. So like out of Vault comics, which universes like really stand out to you? Because I know you kind of like the dark, the moody stuff. So I guess you could pick one of those, and then maybe something that's the complete opposite, maybe like bright, cheery. What would you say are your favorite universes?
I mean, the barbaric stuff is really, really fun. That's kind of like it's almost like Game of Thrones meets like Deadpool type humor. So it's a
Mm.
lot of fun. It's very it's very high fantasy, but it's also very like silly and whimsical and fun.
Right.
It's about this character Owen who has a talking axe. So that's really awesome.
Mm.
So that's really cool. And then we also the book that I was talking about earlier that we're on the sixth arc of is called Money Shot, and it's it's a like humorous, explicit book about some scientists who fund their research by making porn with aliens, which is so far from what barbaric is. And then we have other books that are like pure horror. We have a book right now called Excommunicated that's about a nun who has to work together with a demon to like save the world, kind of essentially. So yeah, we do a lot of really
It sounds
different
really
stuff.
interesting. What's that one
Yeah,
called? What's that called?
Excommunicated.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, sounds like there's quite a few risque kind of titles over there. So it sounds like
Yeah, it definitely is different than Marvel in that way. We typically will do something called a black bag cover for a lot of our covers. You know, I'm sure you guys are like familiar with how like variant covers work, since like that's a thing Marvel and DC does as well. But we typically, with depending on the book, we'll have a black bag cover where it'll either be like some kind of explicit cover with maybe some nudity, or it'll be like a gory cover with some blood and guts and stuff that the comic book shops aren't necessarily allowed to have on their shelves.
Oh wow.
okay, more like mature, kind of like back in the day when they had you go to the gas station at the naughty magazines and
Yeah.
yeah, okay. So like where do you see kind of the future of the industry going? Do you see like comic books industry pretty much staying the same, or is there like any pivot in any terms of like what they're attempting to do in general?
I think that when you look at the future of comics, what you're really going to want to look at is what all the independent comics are doing right now. It's very interesting because Marvel and DC right now, kind of other than the James Gunn kind of DC movie stuff that's going on, that's kind of the only thing that right now that's like new and different than what we've been seeing in the past couple of years. Marvel and DC are kind of from my point of view, kind of leaning toward maintaining nostalgia and maintaining those fans that they already have. Whereas a lot of the newer comic book companies and independents are, going for taking risks, throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. So I
Right.
think as time goes on, these independent comics are going to keep doing really well and are going to draw a lot of attention. And then the big two, I guess, DC and Marvel, are at some point going to have to make a decision as to whether or not they want to take a risk and do something new and interesting, or if they want to keep trying to maintain their original audience. Because we're definitely seeing a lack of younger viewership in terms of a lot of comics. So that's a big problem right now in the industry.
Interesting. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because the big companies are scared to do anything different. A lot of what they do is, making comics for the same, middle-aged dudes that have been reading them since they were kids, which there's nothing wrong with that. But at a certain point, the younger people are going to be the ones who have all the money, who are going to be going to the store and buying the comics. So if you're still making the same comics that you've been making for 40 years, at a certain point, people might want to look for something new.
It's kind of like Harley Davidson, like they make motorcycles for like 40-year-olds and up, and I mean it's good while they're still alive, that generation, but once they get too old to ride and they haven't cultivated a new audience, then the company's going to be in big trouble. So just from what
Exactly.
you've seen at Vault, like what are some of the sort of themes, or what are some of the things that the younger generation are really gravitating towards? Like what do they like that's different than maybe somebody who's 40 or older?
I think the biggest thing right now is seeing different kinds of characters as the main characters. A lot of younger people like to see themselves in main characters, and I feel like what was more popular maybe like in the 80s was like a lot of people would go and they would go, pick up like an Iron Man comic, right? And obviously they're not going to directly relate to someone like Tony Stark, but they might aspire to be like him. Whereas nowadays, I feel like we're seeing kind of a turn of like, I don't really want to read that Tony Stark comic because I'm 12 and I'm not Tony Stark. I want to read something more like, let's say, like a Miles Morales comic. It's more relatable. it's more easy to, it's more of an attainable thing, and you feel more seen in that comic. And we're definitely seeing a lack of like younger characters, a lack of diverse characters. So at a certain point, things are just going to keep dwindling, and people are going to get upset that they're not seeing themselves in those comics.
That's a really interesting point. Because like when me and Brian grew up, most of the comics, or pretty much all of them, they're like almost like on steroids, super buff, super
Yeah.
fit, the perfect archetype. So that's interesting that they're going towards more relatable, like maybe not as perfect looking characters. Do you think there's room for, let's just say, characters with like serious flaws, because most of the time superheroes are almost perfect.
Right.
Do you think
Definitely. I feel like we've definitely seen an increase in interest for kind of morally gray characters. Because I feel like when you've already had so many of these, more perfect, idealistic characters, it gets to a point where people, they read all those comics and then they're like, okay, well, now that I'm done with that, I'm bored. I want something new. And
So
if,
it's
they
not
keep,
like they want the super good or the super bad. They want kind of somewhere in between that that's a little more relatable to us as humans.
yes, yeah, definitely.
So I mean, I think the kind of the difficulty of coming into the game late is like a lot of the stories have already been told. So you have to go into the unexplored orchards to really captivate the audiences.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
like what are some of the areas that have been unexplored that you think should get more attention, like especially with comics, some of the themes? Or
I definitely feel like certain genres haven't been explored as much. It kind of depends, but I definitely have seen there definitely is a lack of horror comics that I definitely have noticed, which Vault is, doing their thing to get some of that in there. So that's been really exciting. So I definitely, yeah, that is a big one. And I just feel like in general, like leaning away from the typical like superhero narrative, because superheroes are obviously really cool, but there's something about them that where, they can only be so relatable. And I feel like right now, especially with like, I don't know, like with the pandemic happening and like, all of this increase in like lack of attention span, I feel like people just always want something new and different and interesting. So I feel like literally everything you can think. There's always something. There's always a story that hasn't been told yet, at the very least within the graphic novel space. And sometimes there's a reason why that story hasn't been told in the graphic novel space. Not every story is meant to be a graphic novel, but doesn't hurt to try.
Now, I mean, we're sort of living through TikTok and YouTube shorts, short form content. I think, to me, if I go on TikTok, my brain starts to get scattered. I'm like, this is, I'm 39. So it's like, I didn't, there was no YouTube when I grew up, so it's like
Yeah.
all this really fast in your face stuff. To me, it's like overwhelming, but maybe to younger generations, they really like that. Like boom, 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 boom.
yeah, like do you have to pace the comics differently to appeal to this younger generation because their attention spans might be shorter? Like you have to make sure the comics are more action packed, or like
I think it kind of depends on the comic, because sometimes, it kind of sells itself with the way that it's told. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's kind of difficult because a lot of the people in, I guess my generation aren't as into comics, and we're kind of trying to find a way to introduce more people to those genres. I'm kind of in a weird in between space where I got like super into TikTok over the pandemic. I was like briefly a little bit TikTok famous. And then as soon as I got to college, I like deleted everything. So now I'm like, I have like Instagram. I'm like, that's really it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like with social media, everybody's inside, they're not interacting with people as much. Therefore, they're probably looking for something more relatable because they're missing that human experience of hanging with friends and so on and so forth. Whereas in our generation, we were more so outside hanging with our friends, and therefore the supernatural appeals more.
That's right.
Yeah.
So like you know, where did you like where do you see let's just say comic books going? Do you feel like they're going to be consumed more digitally, or are you trying to really get the younger generation to get to buy the actual books and have something more physical?
It's kind of an interesting thing right now because there's kind of both happening. There's been, especially in my generation, Gen Z, we've had a very big increase in like the want for physical media. So I know a ton of people who are starting like, collections of DVDs and vinyls. I myself have a CD collection. Just because,
Oh
like, I
wow.
don't know, the internet is a scary place. Like, you never know what'll happen. And physical media, I mean, at least for me, like, I definitely prefer, to be reading a comic with my hands
Well,
personally.
and then
Um,
something like, everything's streaming. So, okay, you're paying,
yeah,
you're paying a fee every month to see this stuff. But if you cut it off, what do you have? Do you have DVDs? Do you have CD? What do you have as
exactly.
like a backup?
I don't
Yeah.
know
And
what
I
it
and I
is.
don't like
Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
I was gonna say I also am like I go to the movie theater to see every single movie as well. I am like streaming stuff like really grinds my gears for a lot of reasons, but I will never if I can watch something not in my living room, I always will.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but just having something physical, it's just a different experience. Like if you have the actual comic versus looking at some pictures on the iPad, it just feels different. I don't know why, but like you mentioned, it's interesting that people are going back to collectibles. And Brian, when we grew up, there was so much different things to collect, like X-Men cards or Pogs. I don't know
I
if
was
you're
gonna say
familiar with that.
Pogs. And then at some point, Pokemon cards got pretty big.
Mm.
Action figures. Are y'all doing like a lot of merchandise for the characters and cards, action figures, so on and so forth?
We haven't done any action figures. We've done a couple of like collectible type things, and we do them a lot of the time if we're doing some kind of like campaign or like Kickstarter to get people interested and excited about certain comics. So I think that we are doing something along those lines for some of our future comics. But yeah, we actually just recently created like a crowdfunding part of Vault Comics, so we're like getting more into that kind of stuff right now.
Oh wow. If you were to make your own comic and you had unlimited resources, let's just say, what would that look like? What would you focus on? Who would your main character be? Would they be dark? Would they be light?
I definitely, I think also just because of like the society we're living in, like kind of like you guys were talking about earlier, and wanting to have these comics feel real and feel like that real like human kind of connection. I definitely value having basically all morally gray characters, having characters that feel real, that feel like even like the really like hardcore, maybe crazy villains. Like I always want those characters to have a side to them where you can kind of either empathize with them or at the very least you can understand them, so they feel more real to you and more concrete. Because I feel like if a story to me, if I'm kind of reading it or watching it and something about it feels like so like too perfect, it almost feels like disingenuous, and it feels almost like, does this story even matter if these characters are too perfect and they don't really feel like real people?
Okay, so if you created this universe, let's just say like, have you watched Game of Thrones before?
I'm
Um,
familiar. Yeah.
okay. So in that series,
Yeah.
they kill off a lot of the
They kill
characters.
yeah, they kill everyone.
Yeah.
In your series, you mentioned is going to be more grounded and realistic. Are you willing to kill off some of the main characters just to?
Oh yeah. Definitely. I feel like some of the most like groundbreaking moments in like my life when I've been, really, really into a book or into a movie is like when they kill a character, but they kill the character well and in a way that makes sense for their arc. I feel like that is really important because I've definitely experienced watching like a TV show or reading a book and they kill a character and it's just unsatisfying. Like I want my readers to be heartbroken. I don't want them to be angry at me. So I feel like that is like you really got to be careful there.
Yeah, so that's definitely risk taking. In terms of risk taking, like what are some of the subjects that you would explore? Some of the risque subjects you would explore, and what do you think you would probably stay away from because it's just a little too out there, or you just don't really want to touch?
I feel like there's certain things that kind of need to be addressed sometimes, especially if you're working in this space where there's so many people who are unwilling to take risks and to take a stand on things. I think it's a bit complicated because, for example, at Marvel, some things are very like apolitical and are kind of in the middle, but you also have comics where, Captain America is going out and punching Nazis. So, there's kind of like this interesting, like, where does the line kind of go? And definitely for me, I like to take risks. I don't worry about, like obviously I think that it's important for, us to make sure that a story is not being misinterpreted. But I also think that if you're going to take a stand on something, you shouldn't beat around the bush,
Right.
especially in our current day and age with so many things going on, politically and like war and like human rights and like all these things. I feel like art is inherently political and any actor or artist or writer who doesn't want to talk about real issues, I'm like, I do not have any respect for people like that. I feel like art is a really great way to introduce important topics to people, especially young people.
That it should like reflect the reality of what we're going through. It's kind of what you're getting at.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because so many people choose to really, not read the news, or maybe they're someone of privilege and they decide to not educate themselves. And I feel like that's just so dangerous in our society.
Exactly. So one of the hot topics of the day is artificial intelligence. In what capacity do you believe it should be used in comics? Like, can it be used to draw panels or create storylines, or should it just be used to maybe brainstorm? Like, what is your opinion on that?
I personally think that AI has no place in any artistic field, really at all. Personally, I think that AI should only be used by like a Tony Stark kind of guy. Like if you're using AI to like cure cancer and like build robots, amazing, great. I feel like that's amazing. But I feel like the whole point of art is that it's human.
Yeah.
So to me, AI being used for things, there's something about it that really irks me. Plus, it also is
Yeah.
generally speaking not the best for the environment, and that's something that I care about a lot. So there's also that aspect to it.
Yeah, me and Kev we talk a lot about AI on this show, and what we find, in our viewers, we find really interesting is that, there's all this talk about saving the environment and things that are good, or bad for the environment, but they're building all these data centers aggressively all over the
Yeah.
place. And it's like, okay, how does that compute? How does,
Mhm.
1 + 1 = 2, but this is not
Yeah.
appearing that way. What do you think about that?
I definitely agree with that. I mean, I'll speak on this very quickly. Love Disney as a company. I worked for them. It was great. However, right after Disney decided to, openly express that they'd made a deal with OpenAI, they released a movie about environmental change and the importance of like environmental social justice, called Hoppers. I don't know if either of you guys saw it. It was a very good movie, but I think that, you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you're gonna take a stance about the environment or about social change or about, doing the right thing, I feel like what you're doing as a company or as a person or whatever like needs to reflect that. So I definitely feel like there's a lot of hypocrisy right now in the kind of like, will we or won't we use AI situation.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, but like I kind of feel like AI is like when you utilize that in a creative endeavors, it's more so for profit maximization. It's not
Mm.
artistic. It's like I want to get this done quickly and cheaply. And just like with any sort of art, you can eventually tell when people are dialing it in.
Yeah, definitely.
So, like, how do you think we should remain grounded and connected with each other versus just getting trapped in this digital isolated prison where we're all doing our own things, only interacting with each other through like tablets and so on.
Yeah, I definitely feel like people just, I mean, it sounds stupid, but gotta go outside and touch grass sometimes. You gotta go out to the
Exactly.
real world and talk to real people. And I
Exactly.
feel like that too has made me definitely like better at like, because a lot of what I do as an editor is communicating with all different kinds of people and facilitating collaboration during projects. And I feel like I've learned the most about doing stuff like that through like meeting people and talking to different people. I've traveled a good amount in my lifetime. I've been to Europe. I was recently on a huge like hiking geology trip in New Mexico where I met a lot of really cool like indigenous people from the
Oh wow.
indigenous tribes who live there. And all of the best experiences of my life and like who I am as a person is definitely built upon the different kinds of people I've met and talked to and like their different life experiences. I don't think I would be a very good writer or editor if I didn't have those experiences talking to people who are different than me.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this for myself. When I was younger, I traveled a lot with different bands, and I was lucky enough to go down to Central America at one
Mm.
point. And I remember, being in Honduras, and we were on this sort of like a snake road, the type of road where you could really only fit one vehicle. So we're on this shaky bus going through the hills and very dangerous. And we see all of a sudden, we see a house with maybe three sides, no roof. The mom and the kids are there. Everyone's smiling. Everyone's happy. Kids are running around, no care. And so like my Western, it blew open my Western mind because the Western perspective is, oh, these people in this third world country, how could they be happy? They have nothing. But I think it's kind of the reverse of that. Because they have nothing, they're happy. That's something that has stayed with me from a young age.
Exactly. And I think, as humans, fundamentally, we're meant to interact with each other. And that's how we form memories. Like, realistically, you're not going to remember, like, oh, 10 years ago, I was sitting in this chat room and that was great. Like, you're going to more so remember, okay, I was hanging with my friends. We were playing basketball or we went to this beautiful locale. And that's what really burns memories in your mind. So, like, just for you personally, what are some of the most vivid memories you have, and do you feel like you could translate any of that into the world of, comic books?
Yeah, I definitely have met pretty much every kind of person that I've met who has been different from me, like inspires me and makes me want to tell stories like their story or to tell stories where they, as, a unique individual, can see themselves in a comic book or in a movie or in a TV show. So I definitely have experienced that. Like I said before, I met a bunch of really amazing Native American people when I was in New Mexico last year. So that was really amazing. And it's something that I really haven't seen a lot, especially in the comic space, I don't think. A little bit, but not necessarily a ton. I met a bunch of really interesting people when I did a geology project in Iceland a few years ago, and
Wow.
that was really interesting as well. Yeah, a lot of my travels have been because of like my geology and hiking background as well. So like that has been very, interesting and influential to my, identity as a writer and editor, even though, I was there like looking at rocks. I also like met a lot of really interesting
And
people. Um,
you
yeah.
said Europe, right? You went to Europe.
Yes. Yeah.
Did you
Yeah.
go
So I
to
went
like
to
Berlin, Germany, or any place like that?
I went to Yeah, I went to Germany, Austria, Czechia, France, Switzerland, and Hungary, I believe.
Nice.
I did not go to Berlin. I went to a lot of the kind of smaller cities. A lot of the places I went felt very kind of like locked in time and kind of untouched by, the modern day and like, more like industrial, like urban cities. Like I went to Prague, which was very, very interesting. It was really cool. And yeah, just the people in Europe are so amazing and cool and interesting. And it's also a very different culture, I've
Very
noticed.
different. Like one thing I noticed when, at least when I came back from Europe on this one trip, I went to a mall like the day
Mm,
after getting back from Germany. And I just remember walking into the mall and I just sort of noticed everyone's checking each other out, everyone's looking at each other. And I'm like, in Europe, you walk down the street, no one cares. No one cares that you're there. They're not going to stare at you. I don't know. I just saw this massive split in terms of what it's like in Europe and what it's like in the US, being a teenager or a late teen. I mean, what did you experience with that going to Europe and then coming back? Did you feel like you were yearning for certain things? I know one European told me, they said, hey, the main difference between Americans and Europeans is an American will ask you, what do you do for work? And a European will ask you, who are you? And that kind of blew my mind because I'm
yeah.
like, wow, that's very accurate. We're always like, oh, what do you do? What do you do?
Yeah, no, I definitely experienced that for sure. Yeah, I noticed that they're a lot more like there's something like I don't even know really how to describe it in like a more professional way, but like the grind, I guess is what I would call it in the United States. A lot of my friends from Europe have never even heard of LinkedIn. And don't wouldn't if they'd had it, they wouldn't care about what their title said. And what they do for a living is not necessarily integral to who they are. I noticed a lot of people in Europe, they just live much slower, more peaceful lives. And as a country in general, a lot of European countries are more, like, I guess, peaceful, you might say, than a lot of areas in America. But one thing I have noticed is a big reason why there's so much, maybe like arguing and like political issues and like all these things is that America is a much more diverse place than Europe. So even though, Europe is great for all these other reasons, I do think that there is good, especially like I'm in New York City, like things are very chaotic here and there's a lot of problems and there's a lot of, there's a lot of crazy people, there's a lot of great people, but there's kind of like beauty in like how diverse things are, even though a lot of people don't agree with each other. It's still like really cool that we're even allowed to have these different opinions.
Yeah, I think we really don't in America. We really don't appreciate diversity because we've been around it for so long that we just take it for granted. So
Definitely.
you kind of go to somewhere with a more of a monoculture, maybe like Korea, Japan, where it's like
Mhm.
95% of the same ethnicity. We have a lot more ideas flowing because we do have all of these cultures mixing and sharing ideas.
Yeah, I mean, look at, in terms of music, look at jazz. Jazz is
Mhm.
uniquely American. And, as a drummer, I've played jazz fusion with Japanese people. And, they're good, but I don't know, there was just something missing there that
Mhm.
very difficult to describe what was missing, but there was something missing. And I think a lot of it has to do with, I teach feel on the drums. I think there was a
Mm,
difference
mhm.
in feel for the Japanese versus the American jazz musicians. So it's just, it's just interesting to notice these little, nuances.
So let's just say your company gave you a budget to travel to a couple of locales or visit a couple of cultures just for like research purposes. Like they want to create a new series. Like
Mm.
who would you say, like what cultures would you go explore to kind of do a comic about?
Ooh, that's interesting. Gosh, I don't know. I feel like maybe Australia. I feel
Mm.
like I would wanna do research about especially the indigenous people of Australia. That's one thing that I've always found to be super interesting. I'm also in general with the whole, geology, paleontology thing, also a huge archaeology nerd. I'm kind of a nerd about almost everything. If I could have had, like, 10 majors in college, I would've. So that's one. I mean, I've never been to Australia, so that's also would be a cool thing for me to do. It's on my list.
The
But
what do they call
yeah.
the instrument? The didgeridoo, right?
Oh, yeah. That's
Isn't that,
cool.
it's like that, like long pipe kind of looking
Yeah.
thing?
No, I think that would be interesting, like the indigenous people and maybe how, once the British, I believe, they exiled the British over to Australia, like maybe something about that, like how they interacted with the indigenous people. That would be an interesting comic. I've never seen something like that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely feel like the more diverse comics get, the better in general.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot to be explored, a lot to be untapped. But like the big two, they're gonna play it safe because they don't, necessarily want to lose their current audience. So, okay,
It's
that's a fantastic.
understandable. Yeah, it's understandable.
But it's just kind of like the Titanic, it moves slowly, whereas a smaller ship it can change instantly. So I think Vault Comics, y'all
Mm,
have a tremendous opportunity to tell some of these untold stories.
absolutely.
So yeah, before we get out of here, for my final question, like what kind of impact do you want to leave on the world of comics when you hang it up? And yeah, like how do you want people to see you? Who do you hope to inspire?
I definitely want people of all, upbringings and, ethnicities, cultures, religions, everything. My like hope for the world, especially in comics, is just for all different types of people to be able to have at least, one character or one comic that they can go to and they can feel seen. And I feel like tapping into any of these untapped cultures or stories is really, really important, because obviously comics has been around for a while. There's so many stories that have been told already, but you could say the same thing for like novels and for poetry and for music. You would never tell a musician to stop making music because it might have been done already. I feel like as time goes on, like we're gonna, and as the culture changes too, like there's gonna be so many new types of people and new types of cultures that can be represented in comics. And I just feel like having a place where someone can go and feel seen and feel inspired, seeing someone like them, you know, doing something cool, or just, being there. And, I don't know, I feel like that kind of stuff also, like, to the industry as a whole, is going to make, I hope, like, our society more welcoming to different types of people. So also that's like a big impact that I've seen, the arts have on our society. So I'm hoping that, different types of characters and stories popping up will increase tolerance and acceptance as a whole.
No, Brian, did you have any closing questions?
Yeah, I would like to ask, especially for our listeners, we're kind of a educational podcast and radio
Mhm.
show. Um, what would you say to the younger generation that, they're really into comics or trading cards, and they want to get into comics ultimately? What path would you recommend that they do? What's your number one tip for that entry level person coming right out of high school, let's say?
I would definitely say something that I have noticed as someone who's interviewed for like a million different jobs is they will absolutely hire you for who you are as a person and not necessarily your skill set. Because skills can, basically every skill, besides like something really difficult, probably like coding, for example, can be learned. But who you are as a person and how hardworking you are and how passionate you are, that cannot be taught to you in a job. So if you go into an interview and you're really going to show how interested you are and how excited you are to get the job done, even if you don't have the experience or the skills, they might hire you just because you are shown to be a very hardworking, determined, and passionate person. Because that's absolutely how I got my internship at Marvel, for sure.
Oh, wow. That's great advice.
Awesome. And it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. But we're at the top of the hour. Before we get out of here, did you want to leave our audience with any closing thoughts? And where's the best place for them to find you at?
I mean, you guys can find me on LinkedIn, maybe Instagram if you want. My name is AJ Shannon. I'm an assistant editor at Vault Comics. Please check out Vault Comics. We have a lot of really cool stuff, a lot of different stuff if you're looking for something other than a superhero comic. Um, yeah, I don't know. I just think everyone should if you're interested in comics and you want something a little different, which everyone should want something a little different, you should always try and read something that's not your typical genre or not your typical main character, because it might teach you something about yourself or about the world around you.
Awesome. We definitely appreciate you, and we appreciate everybody for tuning in. We'll catch y'all next time.
All right, guys. Thank